Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to Counselor's Couch 101. I am Jim Stump, and I'd like to hear from you. Any comments, suggestions, issues that you have in your life, or maybe issues you've seen in other people that you care about that you would thought a discussion of which here would benefit the audience. So any ideas like that at all, please send them. Put them in the comments. If it's a long comment, you can send us in an email. It's a lot easier to work with it there. And the email address is counselorscouch101 at mail.com. All lowercase, no apostrophe, no spaces. Counselorscouch101 at mail.com. Also, I've repeated it and I'll say it again. If any other counselors out there would like to join in this effort, send me an email. Give me your address, your email address, and we'll figure out a way that we can all participate in the types of requests that we're receiving online, and also the types of issues that people might want to hear about. Also, counseling is sort of like medicine. You know, you go to your primary care physician. He's sort of a generalist. They used to call him GP, general practitioner. What that meant was they're sort of like they know a bit about everything. And by that I mean they know how to recognize a situation or a condition when they see it. And if they don't have an in-depth expertise in that particular area, they refer their client, their patient, to someone who is a specialist in those areas. The same thing happens with counseling. We can recognize a lot of conditions, but sometimes we're not the best choice to work with someone on a particular issue. It could be something like a serious mental illness diagnosis, like that. That's really common for counselors to seek help on. Or it could be a particular aspect of relationships that the counselor just doesn't seem to focus on. I don't focus on eating disorders, for example, right? I've had a lot of requests for folks to come in and say, I have this problem and can you help me with it? I say, well, that's not really my area, but let me refer you to someone who has worked in that field and probably could be a better fit for you, someone that could benefit you and show you the way to where you want to be with that particular issue. So we'll find a specialist and refer them out. And for that reason, I'm asking counselors to come in to share their expertise, and hopefully we'll get a broad spectrum of talents and focuses. And counselors have experience in particular areas. If we can get a wide range of those sorts of things, we can be of more benefit to the public, right? I was thinking about, someone asked me about triggers. They say, what is this thing always talking about triggers? It wasn't just me. The expression came from someone else. But the whole idea is, if you imagine a trigger on a rifle, for example, when you pull the trigger, it causes a reaction up, and then let's say it releases the bolt. The bolt slams into the back of the cartridge, and then the cartridge explodes, and it sends the projectile forward. That's how it works emotionally. But in order to understand triggers, we have to understand what is being triggered. And this stuff gets hard to talk about when you work with it for years and years and years. You start to get a feel for it. And oftentimes it's not logical at all. It's all about emotions. It's all about feelings. And a human beings start downloading feelings before they're born, and certainly before they have the use of language, before they have a word to identify it, before they can hang it onto something that explains it and allows them to communicate what they're dealing with other people. Long before that, we're downloading feelings, and oftentimes they can be negative feelings. I sort of think of for me, it's like Freud's idea of the id. It's a morass of feelings, and oftentimes it's a morass of negative feelings that are all going around. They're affecting each other and causing a person discomfort, but it's not necessarily one thing. But getting back to triggers again, I think of it, have the image of, let's say, a string. Let's say something happens to you when you're very, very young. So at the very end of the string, you make a knot, right? And then later on, something that's similar to it. I mean, let's say you fell down the stairs when you were 3 years old, and that's your first little item on there. Let's say that you're out playing baseball when you're 10 and someone slides into you and knocks you down, and that gives you a similar sort of an experience as to falling down the stairs. So you put another knot in the string about being knocked down playing baseball. When you're 16, Maybe someone comes along and you're interested in a boy or a girl and they reject you, and you get this same sort of a feeling of someone punching you in the chest. And so that becomes another item that's associated with the other feelings of negativity. You put another knot in the string, and after a while, you have a whole bunch of knots in the string. Um, but part of the issue is that the strings are all different. So we can have a string about anger. We can have a string about resentment. We can have a string about physical pain. We can have a string about feeling abandoned, right? We can have a string about being in love. We can have a string about accidents. We can have a string about loss. And we're all carrying around all these strings with us, with all these knots in them from various experiences that we had in our lives, right? And so when something happens to us today, let's say it's someone kicks you in the stomach, so to speak, or in the chest rather, but they don't do it physically, they do it emotionally. Well, that sets that whole string of that feeling vibrating. And what happens is the person is not only reacting to the incident that just occurred, they're reacting to all that pent up resentment on all those issues going back to when the child was 3 years old and fell down the stairs. It's all connected. So when the person is reacting, they're not reacting with just the amount of emotion at the time. They're reacting according to all these resentments they have stored up over time. And that's what happens. That's basically what we're talking about when we talk about triggers. Triggers have to trigger something. And if we identify what is being triggered, then we can work with it. By the way, when it comes to counseling, sometimes we can take a particular trigger and we start working on it and we reduce the emotional charge it has on a person, particularly a negative emotional charge on a person. And even though we're working with one item, say it was an item from when that person was 16 years old, it often can benefit all the other items on the string, and we can release the negative feelings and memories and resentments from all those things on the string if we can work with one of those. Oftentimes that's how it works. Other times we work on things up on the top end of the string and we never get to the root, and so that problem never really goes away. It's still there the entire time. And by the way, a note on that, oftentimes we don't get rid of past resentments and ills and experiences and so forth. More often we dial down the charge that it has on us. So if we're really, really angry at something that happened and we say, well, it's a 90 on a scale of 1 to 100, it's a 90. Well, we're trying to get that to reduce. So we're not getting rid of it entirely. It's like we don't want to erase your memory. We just want to erase or dial down some of your negative reaction to the memories. So that's another thing to keep in mind when we think about triggers. So triggers can be about anything. And it's funny because anything can set one off. Anything can be a trigger. I just remembered a gentleman I worked with years and years and years ago. This guy was a family man, had a wife, loved her, and all that. He was a hard worker, made good money, professional guy. But for some reason, he had this, behavior pattern. He'd go down over, we're in Los Angeles, he'd go down by LAX and rent a hotel room, a nice hotel room, right? And then he would invite up a lady who was working, shall we say, right? And he said that he could never get into it. He could not enjoy it. It meant nothing to him unless he could convince the lady of the evening to put on these red shoes that he would bring, right? Particular old style red shoe. And if she had on those red shoes, he can enjoy the entire evening and he can get his money's worth and like that. And we talked about that at length. By the way, not only did he go up there alone, he invited his wife along, said bring her along too, right? He wasn't there trying to cheat on his wife. He was dealing with something that was going on in him, something that needed release, and he didn't understand it, but he knew if he went up into a nice hotel room and invited a lady up, and she wore these red sneakers, he would get rid of this charge he had in him. Well, we talked about it and talked about it and talked about it. And finally, he came to realize the significance of those red shoes. He remembered once his mother going to someplace, being with friends. I guess there was like a house party and they were drinking alcohol and this and that. And she wore like a polka dot dress and a hat and like that. And he remembered all that. And she was leaving him to go off and be with all these other people. Apparently there was no father for the guy in the picture at that time. but she would go off and be with these folks, particularly men, and she'd stay away for a long time. And he said, whenever she did that, she always wore red shoes. This isn't brain surgery, folks, you know. We talk about Rosebud. It really is like that. The connection of red shoes to being abandoned and his need to fill that hole, to do something about that abandonment, caused him to behave in the way he did. He finally came to understand his behavior pattern and why he was doing it. And we worked on it and worked on it. I don't know that he ever gave it up entirely. I do know that he did improve. He dialed down that reaction that he was having. He was more comfortable in the world, and he didn't feel as though he was crazy or had lost his mind because he began to understand it. So whenever he had a feeling of being rejected or abandoned, that was the trigger. He might have had an argument with the wife. Maybe he was trying to make a sale on his job and he was rejected. The person didn't make the purchase and like that. And he'd feel that kind of abandonment, and then he'd be off to the hotel in the red shoes. So that was the trigger for that. We can have all kinds of triggers. It could be anything. It could be a sight, a sound. It could be a color, right? It could be a place. It could be a wonderful vacation, Yosemite or Big Bear maybe. Or it could be Disneyland or Knott's Berry Farm, anything like that. Anything can be a trigger. I remember one time another guy, he was trying to get off of drugs, right? Cocaine, I think, was his drug of choice. And he was driving down the 405 freeway south, going from work back to his home. And he said he saw a big billboard along the side of the road advertising a gentleman's club, right? And so as he's looking at that sign over there, he thought to himself, it'd been a long time since he'd ever been intimate with a female. And he thought he would go and go down to some place that he knew of in a very inexpensive motel and invite somebody up who was out front and, you know, take care of that need. But what happened was he also connected having illicit sex with doing drugs. And the upshot of the thing was that he never got to the motel room with the lady. He went out and got drugs, and he was out on his drug binge for 2 weeks before he finally came out of it. Then he came back to one of our group meetings and he told the story. He was triggered by that sign for him to visit a gentleman's club. That triggered all the experiences that he had in the past around sex and women, and they were all connected with drugs. And so he went from that billboard down to getting loaded for 2 weeks. Things can trigger you. It can be anything. And the way we find these things out is we talk. We sit and we explore things, explore history. We explore the type of feelings, the type of thoughts that people have. And we try to find their origin. And then we try to dial it down a bit so that their lives can be more in control. I hope that explains a little bit something about triggers. If you have any questions, please send them over. It's a lot easier to react to emails and comments and suggestions and questions that people send in. It's a lot easier to react to that than just try to guess what the public might want to hear. If there's a particular topic you would like us to address, send that in. If you have a particular feeling you'd like someone to help you understand, send that in as well. Let us know whether or not we can use your name and whether or not we can use your situation in one of these episodes of YouTube. Other than that, I can't mention it. I can only respond to that person via email. And I don't know how far that will go, but we try to do the best we can. Anyway, triggers, we all have them. Don't think we don't. It's not a question of getting rid of them. It's a question of learning how to dial them down, learning how to live with them, and to not let them control our lives. Thanks for stopping in. I appreciate it. We'll talk with you next time.